World War II's most lethal female was a young Russian woman who had to work hard to convince the authorities to let her fight on the front lines. When they finally relented, they sent her into combat without a rifle. She eventually got her hands on one, and proved her chops as a deadly sniper when she killed over 300 fascists in less than a year. Following are 20 things about her and other lethal historic figures. History's most lethal female sniper. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko, née Belova, was World War II's deadliest female sniper, and probably the war's most lethal female combatant. She was born to Russian parents in the Ukraine in 1916, and moved with her family to Kiev when she was young. A tomboy since early childhood, Pavlichenko had a fierce competitive streak in all sports and athletic activities. In her teens, she joined the shooting club of a paramilitary sports organization, the Volunteer Society for Cooperation with the Army, Navy, and Aviation. She took to firearms like a duck to water. Pavlichenko became an excellent sharpshooter, who earned a Marksmanship certificate for those skilled at precise shooting, and was awarded a coveted Vorshilov sharpshooter badge. She got married at age 16 and had a son, but the marriage fell apart and she supported herself as a grinder in a military factory. She attended Kiev University with plans to become a history teacher and scholar, and competed in track as a pole vaulter and sprinter. She also took a 6-month sniper course run by the Red Army. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Pavlichenko was in fine fettle to take them on. Military authorities wanted to make this woman a nurse, but she insisted that her place was in combat on the front lines. When the Germans invaded in the summer of 1941, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was 24 years old, and in her 4th year of higher education. When she heard the news, she dropped everything and rushed to Odessa to enlist in the Red Army. The military authorities wanted to shunt her into a role viewed as more suitable for women, and pushed her to become a nurse. She refused, and insisted that she had the skills and physical fitness to fight on the front lines with the infantry. As the invaders plunged ever deeper into Soviet territory and the situation grew more desperate, the authorities finally relented and allowed her to join the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division. Because of dire equipment shortages, Pavlichenko wasn't even given a rifle, but was instead issued some fragmentation grenades. Her baptism of fire came on August 8, 1941, as her unit fought desperately to defend a hill. She finally got her hands on a firearm when a fallen comrade handed her his Model 1891 Masinigan bolt-action rifle. She promptly shot 2 enemy personnel, and demonstrated her lethal chops to her comrades. From then on, she was officially designated a sniper. It was a dangerous occupation. During World War II, the Red Army trained and deployed 2,000 female snipers. Only 500 of them survived to see war's end. Lyudmila Pavlichenko killed hundreds of enemy soldiers in her first few months of combat. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's first 2 kills in August 1941 were just the start of the lethal havoc she would visit upon the invaders. Over a 2.5-month stretch, in what came to be known as the Siege of Odessa, German troops and their Romanian Axis allies sought to seize the Black Sea port city. Pavlichenko fought on the front lines and took a deadly toll on the enemy. By the end of August, she had over 100 confirmed kills, and had been promoted to the rank of senior sergeant. By the time the siege ended with the fall of the city, Pavlichenko's kill count had climbed to 187. The Soviets retreated to Sevastopol on the Crimea, where she fought with the defenders in another siege for 8 months. In the midst of war, she married a fellow sniper, but he was fatally injured by mortar fire a few days after the wedding. That only further fueled her determination to punish the enemy. By May 1942, her confirmed kill count had risen to 257, and she was commissioned as a lieutenant. The more lethal she demonstrated herself to be, the more dangerous assignments Pavlichenko was given. As the number of her confirmed kills rose, and her lethal cred was further cemented, the military leaned more and more on Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and gave her more and more dangerous assignments. Those the hairiest were counter-sniping missions, de facto duels to take out the other side's snipers. She excelled in those engagements in which snipers patiently and quietly stalked each other across the lines, with death the common penalty for the first one to make a mistake, and survival the winner's chief reward. Pavlichenko fought dozens of sniper duels and won each and every one of them. The most memorable one that stuck in her mind was against a particularly skilled German sniper she was assigned to take down during the siege of Sevastopol. She carefully stalked him, even as he stalked her, for 3 days amidst the debris and wreckage of the city's ruins. In the end, as she recounted, her adversary made one move too many, and ended up as one of 36 enemy snipers whom she took down. In less than a year, Lady Death had over 300 confirmed enemy kills. As the siege of Sevastopol progressed, Lyudmila Pavlichenko's reputation as a deadly sharpshooter grew. She began to train other snipers to follow in her lethal footsteps, and by the time the siege came to a close, her trainees had killed about 100 Axis personnel. By June 1942, Pavlichenko's personal confirmed kill count had climbed to 309. By then she was a famous national heroine nicknamed Lady Death, and known to all and sundry throughout the USSR. She was also well known to the enemy. The German military tried to bribe Pavlichenko and sent messages across the front lines via loudspeakers that blared stuff like, "Lyudmila Pavlichenko, come over to us, we will give you plenty of chocolate and make you a German officer." When that didn't work, the inducements became threats, and towards the end of her time in Sevastopol, German loudspeakers blared, "If we catch you we will tear you into 309 pieces and scatter them to the winds." Rather than scare her, the fact that the enemy accurately knew her kill count only made her happy. From lethal combat to public relations. In June 1942, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was severely injured by mortar shell fragments that struck her in the face and head. Stavka, or the Soviet High Command, was not about to let a national heroine perish from lack of adequate medical care in the hard-pressed and besieged Sevastopol if they could do anything about it. Accordingly, they ordered her evacuated by submarine. She recovered from her injuries after about a month in a hospital, and was eager to return to the front lines, but her combat career was over. After her close brush with the Grim Reaper, Soviet authorities decided that with over 300 dead enemies to her name, the lethal Lady Death had fought enough. From then on they reasoned, she would be more valuable to the national war effort not on the front lines with a sniper rifle in her hands, but as a trainer who prepared other snipers for the rigors of combat. She would be even more valuable in a public relations role, both at home and abroad. Lady Death in the United States of America. In late 1942, the hard-pressed Soviets were desperate for their allies to launch a second front and relieve the pressure on them, so Lyudmila Pavlichenko was sent to the U.S. to drum up support for a second front. She became the first Soviet citizen received by an American president, when Franklin D. Roosevelt welcomed her to the White House. She also became a lifelong friend of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who invited her to tour America and recount her experiences. She was taken aback by the frivolity of the American press. Pavlichenko, who had been in combat for a year and killed over 300 enemy soldiers, was referred to as the girl sniper, and was questioned about the kind of lipstick and makeup she used on the front lines. As she recalled, one reporter even criticized the length of the skirt of my uniform, saying that in America women wear shorter skirts and besides my uniform made me look fat. She stolidly plugged on, and won great applause in a Chicago speech when she stated, "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" During her tour, Pavlichenko spoke of the lack of racial segregation in the Red Army, and its gender equality, both matters in which the U.S. military lagged far behind. By the time she left, Pavlichenko had made an impression, and even inspired Woody Guthrie to write a song about her. Miss Pavlichenko. Pavlichenko's wartime experiences left her with PTSD. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's public relations tour also took her to Canada and Britain. Her arrival in Toronto was greeted by thousands of well-wishers, and she was presented with a scope-mounted sniper rifle, now on display at the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. In Britain, the lethal warrior gave speeches, visited factories and the ruins of Coventry Cathedral, and accepted donations for the Red Army. Despite her efforts, however, she and her countrymen had to wait 2 more years before a second front was opened in France in 1944. Upon her return, Pavlichenko was promoted to major, given the country's highest military distinction, the title Hero of the Soviet Union, as well as the Order of Lenin, the highest civilian distinction, twice. Pavlichenko never returned to combat, but trained snipers until war's end. Afterwards she resumed her studies and graduated from Kiev University with a history degree. Unfortunately, she struggled with depression and PTSD for many years. In 1957, during a visit to Moscow, Eleanor Roosevelt insisted that she see her friend, Pavlichenko. Amidst high Cold War tensions, the reunion took place under KGB supervision. However, the two women managed to give their attendants the slip and catch up, laugh and reminisce about the months spent together touring America. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, history's most lethal female sniper, passed away in 1974 after a stroke. This Finn might have been more lethal than Lady Death. Lethal as Lyudmila Pavlichenko was, she might not have been as lethal as one of her country's adversaries, Finnish sniper Simo Hayha, who ran up a huge score against the Red Army. Nicknamed the White Death, Hayha is commonly credited with killing 505 Soviet soldiers during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, a David versus Goliath fight that pitted tiny Finland against her giant neighbor. It should be noted, however, only 259 of those kills were confirmed, while Pavlichenko had 309 confirmed sniper kills. Hayha was born in an agricultural community and from early childhood was accustomed to hard work on the farm. He had a lifelong passion for rifles, entered and won numerous marksmanship competitions, and his home was full of trophies. Hayha got an early start in the skills of the hunt, and first learned how to stalk and bring down game in the Finnish wilderness when he was still a child. Thus, he picked up traits of toughness, patience, and accurate shooting that came in handy, and served him well when he went to war. Simo Hayha's years of competitive marksmanship made him a lethal sniper. Simo Hayha did his one-year mandatory service in the Finnish army in 1925, and after his honorable discharge, he signed up for the Civil Guard, Finland's equivalent of the National Guard in the US. There, his years as a huntsman and competitive shooter made him his unit's best shot. So he was trained as a sniper, first with a Russian Masindagant bolt-action rifle, and later, with an improved Finnish variant. In due course, he was able to accurately hit 16 targets in a minute, from a distance of about 200 yards. In the heavily forested Finnish landscape, there were few unobstructed lines of sight, and thus few targets at distances longer than that. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939 and kicked off the Winter War, Hayha was called up for active duty in the Finnish army, and finally got the opportunity to put his years of marksmanship practice to lethal use. Although the invaders greatly outnumbered the Finns, the Red Army had not gotten over Stalin's recent military purges, which removed many experienced officers and left the Soviet military in disarray. The Finns, by contrast, while numerically inferior, were better trained and organized, and were more familiar with the local terrain. They were also highly motivated, since their own homes and families were in the invaders' path. The sniper did in hundreds of Soviet soldiers in just 3 months. Simo Hayha became known as the White Death in the course of the Winter War. Every day he donned white winter camouflage to blend into the snowy landscape, took his rifle and a day's supply of food and ammunition, and stalked Soviet soldiers in the Finnish wilderness. He picked kill zones along likely enemy routes of advance, and selected positions that overlooked them. Hayha then burrowed into the snow, and patiently waited for enemies to enter the deadly grounds. He did not use a scope, because he did not want to risk exposure from sunlight glare. Instead, he relied exclusively on iron sights, which made his 505 kills that much more impressive. Later, sources from his unit pointed out that only 259 of those kills were confirmed, the rest were probable, but unconfirmed. However, even if he had only killed 259 enemy personnel, 259 kills would still make Hayha one of the most lethal warriors to have ever walked a battlefield. Especially when one considers just how relatively brief the Winter War was. It began on November 30, 1939, and ended on March 13, 1940. Hayha had thus put paid to at least 259 enemy soldiers, and perhaps as many as 505 in only 3.5 months. A pacifist sent to war. When America joined the World War I in 1917, there was little to indicate that Alvin York would become one of the conflict's most lethal heroes. York was born in a log cabin in rural Tennessee, the third of 11 children of impoverished but deeply devout parents. As a young man, he worked in railroad construction and as a logger to help the family make ends meet. On his downtime, he developed a reputation as a hell-raiser, and as a violent alcoholic who liked to fight in saloons. Eventually, he underwent a religious conversion experience and became a pacifist. When he received his draft registration card after America joined the war, York requested an exemption as a conscientious objector. His request was denied, and he was drafted, sent to boot camp, then assigned to the 82nd Infantry Division. York got over his pacifism after his commanding officers used biblical passages to convince him of the morality of fighting for a just cause. He was shipped to France, and by October 1918, he had been promoted to corporal. When Alvin York suddenly found himself in charge of the remnants of a raider party, on October 8, 1918, amidst the Meuse-Argonne offensive, recently promoted Corporal Alvin York was sent across no man's land in a party of 4 non-commissioned officers and 13 privates, their mission, to infiltrate German lines and silence a machine gun position. However, the German position turned out to be far stronger than intelligence had indicated. As the Americans made their way through broken terrain, they entered the kill zone of over 35 well-hidden machine guns. The Germans opened up a lethal crossfire, and within seconds, 9 doughboys, including the other 3 non-commissioned officers, were cut down. York suddenly found himself the most senior non-com, in charge of the survivors. As he described what happened next, "You never heard such a racket in all of your life. As soon as the machine guns opened fire on me, I began to exchange shots with them. There were over 30 of them in continuous action, and all I could do was touch the Germans off just as fast as I could. I was sharp shooting. All the time I kept yelling at them to come down. I didn't want to kill any more than I had to. But it was they or I, and I was giving them the best I had." A former pacifist who became a lethal whirlwind. Corporal Alvin York set out to do his best against waves of attacking Germans, and his best turned out to be amazing. From an upright position, then from a prone one, York simply drew beads with his rifle on any German heads that popped up, and put them down like it was target practice. All while a hail of bullets from dozens of German rifles and machine guns was directed his way. York's rifle eventually ran out of bullets, so 6 Germans took the opportunity to charge him with bayonets. He took out his .45 pistol and shot all 6 before they reached him. As he described it, "I take it off the 6th man first, and the 5th, then the 4th, then the 3rd, and so on. That's the way we shoot wild turkeys at home. You see, we don't want the front ones to know that. We're getting the back ones, and then they keep on coming until we get them all." The Germans finally had enough of the lethal machine that none could seemingly halt. An officer raised his hands, walked up to York, and told him, "If you don't shoot any more, I will make them give up." That was fine by York. When it was over, he had single-handedly killed 28 Germans, captured 132 more plus 32 machine guns. The exploit earned him the Medal of Honor and made him World War I's greatest American hero. The unassuming Ukrainian hero. The summer of 1941 was a bad time for the Soviet Union, and especially for the Red Army and its soldiers. The recent sudden German onslaught, Operation Barbarossa, had caught the USSR off guard and inflicted catastrophic losses upon the communist state. As Soviet military casualties mounted, the reeling Red Army's personnel withdrew, or fled in disarray from the advance of the rampaging Nazis. An unheralded Ukrainian soldier, Dmitry Ovcharenko, found himself among the millions of caught up in the calamity. Ovcharenko's obscurity did not last for long. However, a few weeks into the German invasion, he managed to pull off an act of sheer brutal and lethal bloody-mindedness that set him apart and made him an early Soviet war hero. In a feat worthy of an action movie or a horror flick, Ovcharenko took on scores of Germans without a firearm. Instead, he slaughtered them with an axe. By the time his rampage was over, dozens of Nazis were slain, and the rest had fled in terror. A guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. The son of a carpenter, Dmitry Ovcharenko was born in 1919, in the small village of Ovcharovo in the Ukraine's Lugansk district. He grew into a mild-mannered young man. In light of his lethal wartime exploits, it is ironic that acquaintances described him as somebody without a vicious bone in his body, and the type of person who would not hurt a fly. He quit school in 5th grade to earn his way in the village's collective farm, where he cared for cattle, cut and stored hay, and tried to learn the craft of carpentry from his father. Everyday life in his village required handiness with an axe, a skill that came in quite handy and served him quite well. When he turned 21, Ovcharenko was drafted into the Red Army. He was not gung-ho about the military, and all he wanted was to serve his term, return to his village, get married, and raise a family. Then the Nazis invaded in June 1941, and Ovcharenko's plans went up in smoke. It did not take him long to make the invaders pay. A sudden lethal axe rampage. In mid-July 1941, A few weeks after the German invasion, Dmitry Ovcharenko was in southern Ukraine, a soldier in the 389th Regiment of the 176th Infantry Division. He had been wounded recently, and as he recovered, he was given light duty and was entrusted with a cart to bring up supplies from the rear to his comrades on the front. Unbeknownst to Ovcharenko, however, the front had moved, and on July 13, 1941, he turned a bend in the road and found himself face to face with dozens of Germans. An enemy soldier quickly seized Ovcharenko's rifle. Then an officer came up to interrogate him. Unfortunately for the Germans, Ovcharenko's cart had an axe. Mid-interrogation, Ovcharenko suddenly seized the axe and lopped off the German officer's head in a single sweep. As the shocked Germans tried to process what had just happened, Ovcharenko dove into the cart, pulled out some hand grenades, and lobbed them at the enemy soldiers. Within a few lethal seconds, the ground was covered with 21 dead and dying Germans, and the rest scattered. Ovcharenko hefted his axe and gave chase. He caught up with another enemy officer from behind, and lopped off his head as well. The now thoroughly demoralized and terrified Germans, most likely reach echelon troops, rather than frontline soldiers, did not fight back. Instead, they gave in to blind panic and fled in terror. From a nobody to a national hero. Dmitry Ovcharenko eventually wore himself out chasing the Germans with an axe, and returned to his cart, whose vicinity by then was a field of carnage. He collected all the maps and documents and weapons off the dead enemy soldiers, loaded them in the cart, and delivered them to the headquarters of the 389th Regiment. When he explained what had happened, he was not believed at first, not until his comrades inspected the scene of his one-man rampage, and saw the gruesome evidence scattered all over the place. Having killed 21 German soldiers with grenades, and beheaded 2 German officers with an axe, Ovcharenko was awarded a Hero of the Soviet Union decoration. As a military historian put it, Ovcharenko showed wit and extraordinary courage, taking advantage of the confusion of the Germans. I think that he was a man of unbending will, devoted to his duty, land, and homeland, and striving to liberate his native land from fascist invaders by any means. Dmitry Ovcharenko soldiered on until the war's final year, until he was fatally injured in Hungary. He died of his wounds on January 28, 1945. The Mafia's lethal murder enterprise. In the 1930s and 1940s, the Italian-American Mafia set up a contract killer system that worked so smoothly it came to be known as Murder Incorporated. It was broken into 2 subgroups and organized along ethnic lines: Italians and Jews. The hitmen of each group usually, but not always, were sent after targets of their own ethnicity. The lethal system was run at first by Lepke Buchalter, a ruthless Jewish labor racketeer in charge of the Jewish section, until his arrest in 1936. The Italians were headed by Albert the Mad Hatter Anastasia, who eventually ran all of Murder Incorporated after Buchalter's downfall. Lepke Buchalter, the initial head of Murder Incorporated, rose to prominence in New York City's criminal underworld as a labor racketeer, the son of a Russian immigrant father who owned a hardware store in Manhattan's Lower East Side. Buchalter lost his father when he was 12 years old, and consumption forced his mother to move to Arizona's dry climate. She left him in NYC with his elder sister, but she was unable to control him, and he drifted into crime. The rise of Lepke Buchalter. Lepke Buchalter's rap sheet began with his first arrest while still a teenager in 1915, for assault and burglary. He did a year in a juvenile reformatory, and soon after his release in 1917, was rearrested and sentenced to a year and a half in Sing Sing prison for grand larceny. When he got out, he got into labor racketeering and via violence and intimidation, began to exert control over New York's garment industry unions. He then used the unions to shake down factory owners for weekly payments, and threatened them with strikes, labor troubles, and other workplace unrest if they did not pony up. Simultaneously, he raided the union's bank accounts and treated them as his private slush fund. By the mid-1920s, Buchalter was in charge of a highly profitable protection racket, and in alliance with the Lucchese crime family, one of New York City's 5 Italian-American crime syndicates. He effectively controlled NYC's garment industry. Then in the early 1930s, at the behest of mob boss and visionary Lucky Luciano, Buchalter created the lethal system that came to be known as Murder Incorporated.